Welcome to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. Tonight's top stories. As college acceptance letters roll in, next year's tuition rates are causing sticker shock. We'll talk with Ave Maria University President Jim Towey about the rising cost of a college degree and the value of a truly Catholic education. He recently survived a second bout with cancer. Today he celebrates 50 years as a priest. We'll bring you my exclusive interview with Chicago's Cardinal Francis George. And we'll introduce you to the family of an American pastor imprisoned in Iran for his Christian faith. Then talk with religious freedom expert Thomas Farr about what it will take to stop the persecution. Thanks for joining us. The Archbishop of St. Paul in Minneapolis is stepping aside amid allegations, which he firmly denies, that he inappropriately touched a minor. The move comes after a young man alleged that Archbishop John Nienstedt touched his buttocks during a group photo session following a 2009 confirmation ceremony. After consulting with the Pope's ambassador to the U.S., Nienstedt decided to remove himself from public ministry, while church officials and police investigate. Nienstedt has been under fire in recent months for failing to aggressively deal with allegations of sexual abuse by priests, a failure for which he publicly apologized on Sunday. The Archbishop says he is, quote, a sinner, but not an abuser. In Philadelphia, Archbishop Charles Chaput has permanently removed 5 parish priests from ministry over allegations of sexual abuse or misconduct. Archdiocesan officials say Chaput made the final decision on Sunday following a formal investigation by a review board. Church officials did not disclose details of the allegations against the 5 priests who were placed on administrative leave after a grand jury report in February of 2011. They said only that the violations range from making inappropriate comments to, quote, boundary violations. Chaput allowed 2 priests who were cleared by the board to return to their duties. A group of several dozen Catholic theologians, priests, and educators are objecting to a decision by the Catholic University of America to accept a $1 million grant from the Charles Koch Foundation. The donation will help the university hire new visiting scholars for its School of Business and Economics. In a letter issued Friday, critics of the university's decision said the libertarian-leaning Koch brothers support, quote, public policies that directly contradict Catholic teaching on a range of moral issues, from economic justice to environmental stewardship. Catholic U officials dismissed the criticism, noting that the Koch Foundation provides support to more than 270 universities nationwide, some of which employ scholars who signed on to the letter criticizing Catholic U. It's not just donations sparking controversy on campus these days. Rising tuition rates are also a flashpoint. College Board data show that tuition and fees at public 4-year universities have jumped 50% in the last decade. Catholic colleges typically cost even more. Are they worth it? Wyatt Goolsby looks at 2 schools that aim to stand out from the crowd.
Here at the Catholic University of America, this is not just a group of students playing pool between classes, but a glimpse of a countercultural vision for Catholic college living. These guys live in an all-male dorm, and they live with a Benedictine monk. All dorms at Catholic U are single-sex these days, a change that promotes virtue among students, according to University President John Garvey.
Part and parcel of the education that we give our students, that we concern ourselves with the kind of people they become. It isn't just a game that we're playing inside the classroom.
The switch to single-sex dorms stirred controversy when Garvey instituted it 2.5 years ago in an effort to discourage the binge drinking and, quote, hookup culture that dominate on many college campuses. It's one of the reasons that Patrick Riley, the founder and president of the Cardinal Newman Society, says Catholic University made it into the 2014 edition of the Newman Guide to Choosing a Catholic College. That guide highlights colleges that the Newman Society considers in sync with the teachings of the Church.
Told his disciples.
Another school highlighted in the Newman Guide is Christendom College, which has only 421 undergraduates. The school emphasizes liturgy and the sacraments to its students, 3/4 of whom attend daily Mass. Christendom President Timothy O'Donnell says the school aims to educate the whole person and help students grow intellectually, morally, and spiritually.
I think schools like Christendom can show that this still can be done today, and that there is a market for people that really are hungering for this type of education. I think it's a lot broader than most people would really think.
In Washington, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining me now to talk about the cost and value of Catholic higher education is Jim Towey, president of Ave Maria University in Florida. Jim, welcome to the show. Great to have you back.
Great to be with you, Colleen.
Jim, let's start by talking about tuition rates at Ave Maria, which you recently slashed by 22%, about $5,000 for next year's incoming class. What prompted this move?
It's part of our mission to make our tuition within the reach of as many families as possible. This is why Tom Monahan started the school, to provide a quality Catholic education at a price people can afford so that they're not graduating with a lot of debt.
And you said at the time that you think all Catholic colleges and universities should do some soul searching on the issue of cost. How do you respond to those who say, well, it's simply not possible, you'd have to start sacrificing in the classroom?
Because I heard that from people saying to us, don't touch your tuition, you're already low. But in reality, if you run an efficient university, if you have an excellent faculty, you can provide a great education without bankrupting families. And I think when I look at the quality we have at Ave Maria University, and I think some schools are charging 2 or 3 times more for the same type of education, I don't understand it. So I can't speak for those institutions, but I can say everybody should do some soul searching about what they're charging families.
And I'm sure as a father of 5, you have some sympathy for parents putting kids through college, right?
I think I'm a little biased since I have 2 in college now, but that is an important point, is that you have to keep in mind the end user. It's not just the student, it's the family, and it's not just their pocketbook, it's the values they instilled in their kids.
Now, what's been the response, and especially in terms of enrollment for next year? Are you beginning to see an uptick as a result of this?
We've seen a big surge in applications, and we hope to see a large freshman class in the fall. We hope to have 400 students. But most of all, we want to maintain good quality and also attract families that are on board with the mission of Ave Maria University, and I think that's the good news about our applicant pool.
And let's talk a little about that mission. Catholic identity in higher ed has been a huge issue in recent years in the church in the United States. Questions of who should be speaking at commencement, who should be given platforms on campuses, what constitutes a truly Catholic university. And you know, some say it's not worth the extra cost of sending my kid to a Catholic school because chances are they're going to come out having lost their faith anyway. Others say, well, you're defining Catholic identity too narrowly. We need to give students the freedom to explore other worldviews. What's your take as president of Ave Maria, and previously, you know, this is your second school where you've been a Catholic college president. What's your take on what constitutes true Catholic identity?
Well, I think you've got to look at what Blessed John Paul II had to say in Ex Corde Ecclesia, a document that provides guidance to Catholic colleges and universities. You have to adhere to the magisterium of the Church. You have to be proudly Catholic, and authentically so. So it's not just simply words, but it permeates every aspect of your university, not just in the classroom, but in your student life programs, in the quality of life in your residence halls. So, and I think it also draws upon the Catholic intellectual tradition that makes Catholic universities different from their peers. So from our standpoint, having a strong mission statement is a beginning, but you have to effectuate it throughout the university, and we're happy at Ave Maria University in our hiring and in the way we select students. We are trying to adhere to a love of the Church, love of the Word and the sacraments, and also to introduce them to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
And you've said also that you want your students at Ave Maria to be rooted in faith but open to the world. The knock on schools like Ave Maria or Christendom or Franciscan University of Steubenville is often that they're too insular. You're just kind of protecting these college kids from the real world, and when they get out there, they're not going to know what to do with it. College is a time to experiment. They need to be introduced to more diversity. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't think you want a Catholic bubble. You certainly want the young men and women that graduate to be able to go out in the world, make a living for themselves and a difference in the world. You want them to be able to think and write competently and be able to engage the culture. So you want people to be able to work in society. That means you have to have diversity on your campus. That means you have to be open and lead people in the pursuit of the truth, but you don't coerce. So I think you can do those things. We're doing them at Ave Maria, and I think it starts with the faculty, and you've got to have the right faculty there that are on board. And if you don't have that, then you have a division. And a lot of schools, a lot of Catholic schools are divided because many don't buy into that vision.
We're almost out of time, but you've also said you want your students to be pro-life but also pro-poor, and you have this new Mother Teresa project on campus. Tell us just a little about it.
Yeah, we're very excited. It's the first of its kind in the United States, and it's authorized by the Missionaries of Charity in Calcutta. And our students are going to learn about Mother Teresa and then also go into service projects in Immokalee, the farm worker community near us, but then in places like Calcutta, where I'll be taking 12 students in May. We want them to go and meet Jesus in his disguise of the poor and also understand more about life. The poor have a lot to teach us, and I think Pope Francis is telling us that.
Jim Towey, president of Ave Maria University, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Colleen. Thanks again.
We have to run to a break right now, but we'll be right back with the latest news from Rome. Stay with us. Welcome back to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. We go now to Rome, where the Pope turned 77 yesterday. The Holy Father surprised everyone on his birthday by naming a new saint, Peter Faber. Faber was the first disciple of St. Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Pope's own Jesuit order. Francis also made some big changes to the Vatican's powerful Congregation for Bishops. Alan Holdren, our Rome correspondent, joins us now with the details. Alan, what can you tell us?
Cardinal Raymond Burke, formerly of St. Louis, is out. Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington, D.C. is in. Now, U.S. media are making a big deal out of this. They say that with Cardinal Burke's reputation as a hardliner, his removal means that the Pope is taking a more moderate line with the Congregation for Bishops. Still others say that the Pope is just looking for greater geographical representation. Proof of this would be that he's named 3 new cardinals as members from Latin America. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why does any of this matter? Well, this is the Pope's closest advisory board as he chooses bishops in the world, so it's very influential.
Interesting. And Alan, a lot of people are also talking about an interview the Pope gave to an Italian newspaper this past weekend. What were some of the highlights?
Well, the Pope has said that he's not going to be naming any women cardinals. He said that women are meant to be valued and not clericalized. Now, this was in response to people who had been talking about this. There were rumors floating around. Now, he also addressed accusations that he's a Marxist. He said that this, on the basis that some people had talked about his economic policy, saying that it was based in Marxist ideas. He said that Marxism is wrong. He said that he has known some Marxists, and they were good people, so he's not going to take offense to this. He did say flatly that anything that he has said on economics is grounded solely in the social doctrine of the Church.
All right, Alan, thanks for the update. Also in that interview, Pope Francis talked about the worldwide persecution of Christians, something he has highlighted as a top concern. The issue could hardly be more personal for one Idaho family. Jason Calvi reports.
7-year-old Rebecca and 5-year-old Jacob Abedini haven't seen their father for 450 days, but wife and mother Nagme has been praying and fighting for her husband's release.
The only thing that keeps me going is my faith in Jesus Christ.
Nagme's husband, Christian pastor Saeed Abedini, is an American citizen and former Muslim. He was arrested last year in his native Iran, where he was in the final stages of setting up an orphanage. But now it's his kids who are without their dad. In a recent letter to his daughter, he wrote,
"It is so hard and so heartbreaking for me to see these pictures and to know that I'm not there beside you as you grow."
In January, Iran convicted Pastor Abedini of being a threat to national security. The reason? His leadership of Christian communities from 2000 to 2005.
They only permit the exercise of religious practice by minority faiths under the control and according to the rules set up by the regime.
That regime has sentenced Pastor Abedini to 8 years in Iranian prison. The White House says President Obama did bring up the pastor in Obama's historic phone call with Iran's new president back in September. And at this recent congressional hearing, the topic was Pastor Abedini.
My husband is suffering because he's a Christian. He's suffering because he's an American. Yet his own government did not fight for him when his captors were across the table from them.
That was the debate. Did the U.S. push hard enough for the pastor's release during the recent nuclear negotiations with Iran?
As we strive to elevate human rights, I just hate to see our efforts to do that amount to attack on on the administration.
They could say, free Abedini today, and he's on a plane back to his wife and children.
This is the second Christmas that Pastor Abedini's been away from home. His kids' one wish this time of year?
My daughter actually, I said, what do you want? And she said, Mom, I just want you to bring Daddy home.
At the Capitol, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining me now to talk about the worldwide persecution of Christians is Dr. Thomas Farr, director of Georgetown University's Religious Freedom Project. Welcome, Dr. Farr.
Colleen, glad to be here.
Tom, just let's talk real briefly about this case, Abedini. Why isn't the U.S. government pushing more aggressively on this case and cases like this?
Well, the sad fact is the United States government has not pushed hard on religious freedom since the International Religious Freedom Act was passed in 1998. So we've had 15 years of this law, and I hate to say it, but I think it's been true of all the administrations. Occasionally they will enter the ring, so to speak, on one individual or another. They didn't in this case. And I agree with Chris Smith, who said if this administration wanted this gentleman released, they could have gotten him released. It's simply not high enough a priority for our national security. It should be.
And you've said that in that 15 years since this act was passed, and you were, of course, the first director of the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom, but you've said in that 15 years, you couldn't think of one country, really, where U.S. policy made things better in terms of religious freedom. I mean, that's a pretty provocative statement. Is that really the sad state of affairs at this point?
It is. I mean, it's sad to say that, but I think I can defend it. I challenge anybody to name a country in the world where we've really made a difference. Now, it is true that we have gotten some people out of jail, which makes this all the more tragic that we failed to do it when we had the kind of leverage that we had in these negotiations with the Iranians. But getting people out of jail from time to time, which we have succeeded in doing, is not the same thing as promoting the institutions and habits of religious freedom. And that is what we have utterly failed to do, I would say under the Clinton and Bush administrations, but it's gotten even worse under this administration, which has really placed it on the back burner. And I'm sad to say it, but I think it's true, and I don't know of anyone who really can argue otherwise. There's been very little argument that they've been doing it, other than, statements by the Secretary of State and the President that we care about it. I don't doubt that. I'd like them to do something about it.
Now, you just got back from Rome, where just this past weekend you met with Pope Francis, and you also hosted a conference on the topic of religious freedom. And a real key thrust of that was the contributions that Christianity has made to religious freedom and that Christians make in their societies. Tell us a little more about that conference.
Right. Well, this is coming at the issue of Christian persecution from a different direction. It's trying to communicate to these societies that Christians have contributed dramatically to their own well-being, to their economic prosperity, to the social and intellectual life of their countries. Christians have been in these countries in the Middle East sometimes for 2 millennia. They predate Islam. They've contributed such an enormous amount that we wanted to have a study of this. So we did. We did a 2-year study of some 36 scholars around the world of Christian contributions historically, but also in the contemporary world of Christian minorities. So we had these scholars in a series of lively conversations and several keynote speeches in which these speakers address the problem that we're talking about now and
so
the contributions.
What is being lost in these societies where Christians are increasingly marginalized, persecuted, imprisoned?
Right. Well, take Egypt as an example that's in the news today. We had a scholar who has focused on the history of Egypt and the contributions of Coptic Christians. They have contributed intellectually to that country. They have contributed to the government in the past in the 20th century. They have made enormous economic contributions. And I think it was best summed up by Archbishop Sacco, who is the patriarch of the Chaldeans, who gave our last speech entitled Christianity Matters, What Happens if Christians Flee the Middle East. He said that if Christians continue to be repressed and flee this area, then they will never have pluralism. They will never have democracy. And the United States will suffer not only because of the suffering of these Christians, but because of the instability that will result. So this is a big issue. It has humanitarian dimensions, but also national security dimensions.
Real quickly, we're almost out of time. What can an ordinary viewer at home do other than pray, which we know is important?
Pray, but also demand your member of Congress and demand the next presidential candidate do something about this. Not just talk about it, but ensure that the State Department have a program and an ambassador at large that actually can advance religious freedom around the world.
Dr. Thomas Farr, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Colleen.
Well, 50 years ago this Saturday, Cardinal Francis George was ordained a priest in Chicago. Today, some 150 cardinals and bishops gathered there to honor him. I sat down with the cardinal recently to get his take on the challenges facing the church. I began by asking him about Pope Francis. You were on the balcony, of course, the night that he was elected. You were in that conclave. Now, looking back 8 months later, what's your impression of the effect he's had? I mean, he's obviously sort of the talk of the media these days.
Yes, yes.
Some Catholics excited about that, some a little nervous about the fans he's attracting. What's your sense?
He was elected because we knew he had much experience in governing, and because he had a heart for the poor. He's become a popular pastoral figure in ways that I hadn't realized were in him. But that's, I suppose, the grace of the Spirit in a new office, when you see suddenly a dimension of someone's personality that you didn't notice before. And so what he's doing is being a pastor to the world, and from there then he can teach and make some changes in the governance of the Curia. He was elected with the mandate to change the Curia, to reform it. You can't reform the church without an ecumenical council, so it all doesn't depend upon the Pope, but he is in charge of the Curia, and that's what he's attending to now.
And here in the United States, just looking at some of the hot-button issues, Illinois lawmakers, as you're obviously aware, just passed a law allowing same-sex marriage in the state. A few of them, Catholic ones, specifically cited Pope Francis in his comment that who is he to judge those who identify as gay or lesbian as sort of a pass to then support same-sex marriage, which obviously is not within the church's teaching, but they were kind of using his words to justify their own votes. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's a misuse of his words. I mean, he was talking about an individual gay man, a homosexually oriented man, who has asked for forgiveness. And so God in his mercy certainly offers that, and we should too, and move on. God is responsible for individuals, and their judgment is in his hands. The Pope wasn't talking at all about so-called same-sex marriage. And to use what he said as a kind of a confessor to reflect upon a policy is dishonest. It's intellectually dishonest, and I've said that. But nonetheless, as you said, people will use whatever they can grab in order to excuse themselves when they depart from the faith that they've been trained in and brought up in. But that's a scandal and a betrayal that we've gotten used to, unfortunately, in this country. I think, I don't know what would have happened had he not given the people those words. We thought we had a pretty good chance of defeating it in the House of Representatives in the Illinois legislature, but perhaps not. In any event, we've got one more bad law that we simply have to live with and see what happens next.
And you've said in the past that the nation-state gone bad is really a key danger these days, especially in the United States.
Well, anywhere.
And you've talked too about, this has been of course repeated ad nauseum, but your phrase that, you know, you'll die in bed, your successor in prison, and his successor in the public square.
The nation state makes a claim to sovereignty that only God can have, and that's the problem. From the very beginning, the church was worried when the empire, the Holy Roman Empire, began to dissolve about nation states that claimed sovereignty, because the Holy Roman Empire was based on personal obligations to people, Pope, Emperor, etc. And suddenly you have an identity from a country as they were created that claims to have control of every aspect of your life. And no country can control every aspect of your life. That's blasphemy. It's not just a danger here. Take a look at the history of the last century when country after country became totalitarian and demanded loyalty from their people that the state had no right to demand, or exceeding the power of the state by redefining marriage, which it didn't invent and has no power to change. Those are authoritarian moves that a state has no right to do. And I was talking to a group of priests in New Orleans when I made that statement. I thought I was just talking to priests, but there was one of your tribe there, a journalist. Right. And what he was concerned about, it was 8, 9 years ago now, he was concerned about the secularization of our culture, what will happen. And I said, hope, don't worry, what's the worst that could happen? And I said, well, I could die in bed, my successor die in prison, his successor be executed in the public square, but his successor, and this is never quoted, his successor will pick up the shards of a ruined society and rebuild, as the church has always helped to rebuild societies once they've ruined themselves. And so in the end, the church will be the church, and we'll do what we have to do to keep people united to God and therefore to one another.
And in terms of the mandate itself, the HHS mandate, which has been such a focal point for the conference, what do you see as next steps? I mean, are we already at that point where there isn't much more that the church can do to resist this?
Well, if you're going to be forced to do something that you know is wrong, and you better be sure that this is the only possible way out. So you have to ask, is civil disobedience possible? Could the hospital just refuse to pay the fines? In which case then will the government close the hospitals? There are a number of options, but most hospitals will, I think, try, in order to keep their service of the poor and of the sick going, find a way out that even under duress nonetheless permits them to remain open. It's terrible that we come to that in this country. I mean, for generations, immigrants built up our institutions, our universities, our hospitals, and now a liberal government, I mean liberal in the classic sense, is taking them away from us. Now they're saying, oh, you can keep your names, but you can't act like a Catholic hospital. Who would have thought 10 years ago that that would be where we were? People should think through, what does that mean? What has happened to our society? And it's not just a question of a single administration, it's the culture. Because a lot of people would agree with this who aren't in the administration, who want to see the church, who want to see every public institution a government institution. You can own it, you can do anything you want, but you must act in public as a government institution. And that's what a lot of people now would say. So what has happened, and how do we change people's attitudes? That's the bigger question.
Cardinal Francis George, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Always good to be with you. Thank you.
Finally tonight, Georgetown University students recently hosted an evening of lessons and carols for Advent. EWTN News Nightly photojournalist Mark Irons was there to soak up the sights and sounds. Take a look.
What happens during lessons and carols and during the Advent season is a call to just slow down so that God can work on us.
That's all for tonight. We'll be preempted by special holiday programming for the next 2 weeks, so we'll see you in the new year. In the meantime, be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And you can catch our entire program again on EWTN's YouTube page. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell, and on behalf of all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, have a very Merry Christmas. We'll see you next time.